Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Ana Mascareñas, and I will be facilitating this evening's meeting of the Exide Technologies Advisory Group. You'll see on the screen that we're sharing the link where you can find all of the meeting materials. If you scroll to the calendar items on this March 11th meeting invitation, you'll see a linked agenda and also presentation materials and a draft currently being updated membership list for the advisory group as well. Those are just for reference. Next slide, please. Just some guidelines. By participating in this meeting today, you understand that it is being recorded. You may be muted for background noise. And during the questions and comments, we'll focus on topics related to today's presentations. We know there have been many virtual meetings in the past months. We thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. This is also the first Zoom meeting we've convened of the Exide Advisory Group. So we are trying and working with promoting people to panelists, and we hope that it fosters more interactive discussion amongst advisory group members today. Next slide, please. On language and captions, if you have not done so already, please make sure to select your language preference at the icon on the bottom of your screen. This will help us ensure that our simultaneous Spanish audio interpretation is working seamlessly. So if you are using Zoom, you can listen in Spanish or in English. Also, if you're calling in by phone only and would like Spanish audio interpretation, you may call 877-920-8432 and enter code 741-502#. We shared this information on the and it's being broadcast and shared right now with everybody who's logged into the meeting. The Spanish translation of the slides are also available at the same link on our website. And you may notice that the closed captions, which are automatically generated, are turned on for the meeting. If you would not like them on, you can move them or you can close them. Please know this is not an official transcript of the meeting. It's meant to assist for having automated closed captions this evening. Next slide, please. Purpose of today's meeting is to share updates and foster discussion with members of the Exide Technologies Advisory Group. I'd like to invite feedback and answer questions on the residential cleanup, facility, and other activities in the project area. As mentioned a moment ago, advisory group members have been asked to designate a panelist for each organization or office. And we ask that when we open up the questions and discussion time, that each of our advisory group members please use the Zoom raise hand function so that I can facilitate and invite you to make a comment, similar to as if we were meeting in person around a table and you would be putting your 10 card up. We have time for public comments and questions as well during agenda items 4, 7, and 8. Which I'll go through in just a moment. Next slide, please. So this meeting is in two parts. The first part is focused on the residential cleanup project activities. After an opening by our co-chairs, Mark Lopez and Meredith Williams, we will have a short block of presentations to discuss progress of the residential cleanup project activities. Tom Steele from the Office of Assembly Member Miguel Santiago will share a brief announcement about the proposed legislation and related information. And then we will open up for a block of advisory group member questions and discussion. That would be followed by a public comment session related to the residential cleanup project activities. Next slide, please. The second half will aim to get started at 6:25, where we'll invite presentations related to the facility. We have US EPA, VERT, and with Path Forward Consulting and the South Coast Air Quality Management District representatives here as part of the advisory group and presenters today. That will be followed by advisory group members' discussion and questions, again, opening up to public comments and questions on the facility, and then any general comments and questions from the public. We will close with some announcements briefly by Dtsc and LA Department of Public Health, and then invite closing comments by the co-chairs. Next slide, please. And before we move into that presentation session, I'm going to turn it over to our co-chairs and invite first Mark Lopez to share some opening remarks, and then Director Meredith Williams. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. Just first off, thank everybody for participating tonight. Of course, throughout this process, the participation of everybody, especially community members and allies, has been crucial to this process. And so I won't say too much more than that, because I'm looking forward to the presentations and maximizing our conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Please, Meredith.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Mark. And I'm glad to be here today. I'm glad and looking forward to the discussion. We have a lot of ground to cover. I do want to take a moment to thank our staff who have been working with a real sense of urgency. They always do, but I've just been hearing stories lately about staff going the extra mile, and I think it really represents their commitment to the community and to the work that we're doing. We, the department, we just are very focused on continuing to keep things moving, even during the pandemic, even with all of the other challenges we're facing. And I hope that folks are experiencing that. We work very hard to be accessible and available to the community, and of course to the other ETAG members. And so I just invite you to reach out to us, not just during this meeting, but whenever an issue comes up that you'd like us to address. I am looking forward to a much more engaged, energetic, lively interaction today. It's been a while since we've had a chance for that. And so I'm hoping that this new format really gives us an opportunity to have some back and forth and to talk about some of the pressing issues that we're facing on the project. Before I wrap up, I just want to thank all of the other agencies who are participating in the meeting today. The agenda really is packed with representatives from other agencies and other parts of government, and I would only point to that as an indication of how complex the project is, that it touches so many different entities, and how it does take all of us to get this work done. And I want to thank everyone for continuing to participate and to keep things moving. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Meredith. And I'll just note that one of the benefits of us using this format is that you can look at the participants and see all of the advisory group members here. In the interest of time, I am going to ask that we start with the presentations. And then when we open up for advisory group discussion, that you please introduce yourself and the office of the organization you're representing, so that all the participants can better understand our advisory group members here today. So I will hand it over to Hortensia Muniz, our residential cleanup project manager. If you would like to start your presentation.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening, everyone. I am Hortensia Muniz, the Exide Residential Cleanup Project Manager. Thank you for participating in today's meeting. I will provide you a brief update on the residential cleanup and the Parkways investigation that are underway. Next slide, please. Our last public meeting was held on January 14th, 2021. During that meeting, a number of questions were asked, and we agreed to respond to them and maintain a record. The questions have been responded to and are located at Dtsc's website at the link below. Dtsc will continue to respond to questions asked during these meetings and record them going forward. We will continuously provide those links for future reference. Next slide, please. Both the residential cleanup and the Parkways investigation are taking place in an area known as the preliminary investigation. It includes 7 jurisdictions located within this 1.7-mile radius of the former Exide facility. To the north and northeast of the former facility, it includes the city of Los Angeles, the unincorporated county of Los Angeles, and the city of Commerce. And then to the south and southwest, it includes the city of Vernon, the city of Maywood, the city of Huntington Park, and the city of Val. Next slide, please. Just a really quick recap for those of you that might have forgotten about the process. The cleanup process generally follows a 5-step process, which can take about 3 months, depending on the access and when it's provided to us. We first notify the property owners that we have funding to clean up their property. When we receive a response from the property owner, we conduct an initial meeting and obtain an access agreement if it was not already in place. We coordinate with the contractor to conduct the confirmation sampling, which informs us of how deep we're going to dig, and allows the contractor to know to which disposal facility the soils must be sent to. During the pre-construction meeting, we addressed the restoration options, the relocation needs, the interior cleaning, and if there's a need to remove personal property from the before the cleanup can occur. There is a typical 60-day or 2-month period between the initial meeting and the cleanup/restoration, sometimes as many as 3 months, or more like 90 days. It largely depends on the permits that are required, the size and complexity of the property, and the soil being removed. Once the property is cleaned up, all of the documentation regarding that particular property is compiled into one report referred to as the letter of completion. Next slide, please. As you can expect, the project has faced some challenges. Starting in March of 2020, in response to COVID-19 restrictions, cleanup efforts were stopped. We later returned to the field. We modified the health and safety plans, and our COVID protocol are consistent with the recommendations by the CDC and state and local health departments. All personnel on site are required to follow the strict COVID protocols and are encouraged to follow them outside of work. Another area where we've faced some challenges have been with unresponsive property owners. We have about 600 property owners with soil lead concentrations above 300 parts per million that have responded to Dtsc's inquiries that have not responded to us. Some were scheduled for cleanup prior to COVID. After COVID, they retracted their access to the properties, and it is affecting our schedule. We are doing everything feasible to reduce this number and secure access by no later than August or September of this year. That will give us sufficient time to close out all the properties by December of 2021. Just to remind you that it takes us between 8 to 12 weeks of minimum preparation. We have sent notifications and will continue to send notification to secure all 3,200 for cleanup by the end of this year. Next slide, please. When the Dtsc defined the preliminary investigation area, we identified approximately 10,000 parcels or properties of sensitive land use, that is, all residences, schools, parks, daycares, and childcare facilities. As of March 5th, we have cleaned up 2,377 parcels. We have sampled 8,606. There was a slight increase from the last reporting period. There are approximately 1,500 parcels within the preliminary investigation area that have not been sampled for prioritization. That's primarily due to access. Earlier this year, we did sample 56 parcels, and the contractor has started submitting those sampling reports. Dtsc will review those sampling reports and prioritize the properties for cleanup accordingly. Next slide, please. Just a quick recap of the cleanup efforts under the cleanup plan. We started in May of 2018. For over 1 year, we steadily cleaned up 20 to 30 properties per week. In March 2020, as indicated earlier, due to rain events and then followed by COVID-19, the curve flattens out and you see a real flat where only 40 properties were cleaned up. In May of 2020, we returned to the field with a revised health and safety plan with addressing the COVID-19 issues. And based on current projections, which are illustrated there in the purple dots, we anticipate to clean up all 3,200 properties by December 2021. Of course, barring any unplanned events, and that our efforts are successful in reaching out to the remaining 600. Next slide, please. The cleanup by jurisdictions as of May 2021. The graph represents the total parcels by jurisdictions and in each of the categories. Down below, you see the legend where the dark blue represents the total parcels that have been sampled in that jurisdiction or identified. And then the light blue indicates those parcels that have been sampled. When the two green columns are of equal height, that means that we have cleaned up all of the prioritized parcels within that jurisdiction. And similarly, when all four bars are equal height, that means we have sampled all of the properties within that jurisdiction and also cleaned up those parcels. Next slide, please. One of the asks of the state auditor was that DTSC not only track, but that we also report out the progress of the cleanup of properties with a higher propensity to expose children. These properties include the schools, parks, and daycares. And in the schools, it doesn't matter whether it's public or private, both are included in this category. All public schools requiring cleanup were promptly cleaned up prior to 2017. Since then, one private school is no longer being used as a school, and a site of a newly constructed charter school was cleaned up before the school was built. DTSC is currently in the process of reviewing all of the records pertaining to that cleanup, and if appropriate, will deem that property clean. Similar, all the parks have been cleaned up, and there's nothing to further to address the parks. Daycares includes those residential properties where the homeowner applies for and obtains a license to provide childcare from their home. DTSC will continue to work with the licensing agencies to identify any properties with soil lead concentrations above 80 parts per million, where the property owner has applied for and received a license to operate a daycare. We will promptly clean up those properties. Currently, we have 19 in that category. Next slide, please. That concludes the residential status update. Just a recap on the parkways. In 2018, Senate Bill 840 appropriated $6.5 million to DTSC to conduct soil lead sampling of the parkways and clean up as many as feasible within the preliminary investigation area. DTSC is to prioritize for cleanup those parcels that are at greatest risk of exposure to children or pregnant women. Both the investigation report and the risk assessment were made available for public comment starting on February 1st and ending on April 2nd. DTSC scheduled 2 public meetings where the public can submit verbal comments and they will be recorded. The first meeting was held last month, and the second meeting is scheduled for next week on March 18th, 2021. You can submit comments at that meeting next week by mail, email, or call and leave a message.
I ordered to keep there, but they don't have garlic munch. And they
at the close of the comment period, DTSC will review the comments, prepare a responsiveness summary, and if additional information is provided regarding the use of the parkways, modify the risk assessment accordingly. Following this, DTSC will public notice the revised cleanup plan and the amended environmental impact report. We anticipate both of these documents being ready or in a draft final form by the summer of 2021. Next slide, please. For additional information regarding the residential cleanup or the parkways investigation, you may reach out to me, Dwayne White, or Dion Falk. I will turn the meeting over to Ana Mascareñas to open up the meeting for other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ortesia. And before I hand over to the next session, just a few highlights on public engagement strategies. Next slide, please. And for those who may not have been here at the very beginning of the meeting, my name is Ana Mascareñas. I'm facilitating today's meeting and providing a brief update on behalf of the Public Participation Program as part of the Exide project. On your screen, you'll see 7 main elements that we shared about as ongoing public engagement. And so door-to-door, phone, and keeping our local office open when it's been safe to do so is ongoing. We have a team of dedicated staff who continue to do canvassing and increased phone outreach and a number of methods to try and reach homeowners who are unresponsive during this time. Hortensia already covered that we have project area mailings also being sent. We've aimed to update our email and our website notifications to be more helpful and welcome any feedback that you have on that. And then I'll cover in just a moment the community meetings and advisory group meetings on the calendar for the year, which we've also updated on our website. Currently, we are planning until other times we're considered more safe with COVID and the pandemic we're experiencing. We are holding meetings remotely. We can also be invited to any organizational meetings and have been invited to several. We want to keep that as one of the key elements to coordinate and communicate with you all. Item number 6 is an interagency coordination. Many of you have already taken part in bi-weekly calls that we hold with local government agencies to make sure that we are updating and sharing information that's relevant to our interagency partners. Next slide, please. Many of the challenges really and opportunities are around getting in direct contact with homeowners. That was mentioned just a moment ago for affecting our schedule. We want to make sure to also be sensitive and be mindful and thoughtful about all the different changing needs that our communities have during this time related to the pandemic. So oftentimes schedules are changing because of a change in a personal circumstance in the community, and we are doing our best to be accommodating and really be mindful of that. We are coordinating with consultants on specific areas and tasks of outreach to help achieve our project goals. And I just want to make another note of appreciation that we did stop during that time a year ago now to assess and make sure we had the right protocols in place. But all of the essential workers doing everything from outreach and engagement to soil removal and restoration and helping move all the different pieces of the project are essential workers that have continued working during these times. Next slide, please. Quick snapshot of the meetings we have on calendar. Next week is that Parkways public comment meeting on March 18th. May 13th, another community meeting. July 8th, an advisory group meeting, September 9th, community meeting, and then November 18th, another advisory group meeting. And we are very open to discussion if we should hold additional conversations or meetings on specific topics. We just wanted to make sure to have these markers throughout the year early on the calendar. So please save the dates so that you know we would convene right now in the Zoom space for the community and advisory group meetings. Next slide, please. This slide has information on how to contact us. Our project hotline is 844-225-3887, and that link will take you to how to subscribe to our email listserv as well. Next slide, please. I'll invite Tom Steele, a legislative aide to Assemblymember Miguel Santiago, Assembly District 53, to please share an announcement and open up his line about the legislative proposal on residential cleanup funding. Tom?
Yes, thank you, Anna. So just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for inviting the Assemblymember to come and speak today. He regrets not being able to make it here, but I am here to give the legislative update on what he and some of the other Exide members are working on for this year. So one of the main bills that the Assembly member is working on is Assembly Bill 1024. And so what that's going to do is allocate some money to complete all of the residential cleanups and to also fund the Exide facility cleanup itself. So that will be an ask of $540 million to complete both the residential cleanups and the Exide facility cleanup. Also in that bill, there's a couple of transparency measures for Dtsc. So one is trying to improve contracting so that we don't have cost overruns and some cleanup delays as we've had in the past. It would also establish some performance milestones and also require Dtsc to post the pace of all of the hazardous waste cleanups that they oversee on their website so that the public can see the pace and the expected completion date of all their hazardous waste cleanups. In addition, the Assembly member, along with Assembly members Cristina Garcia, Senator Durazo, and Senator Gonzalez, are also moving forward a budget ask to fund the residential cleanup and the Exide facility cleanup itself. That's for the exact same amount as what I described earlier, the $540 million. So those are the main efforts that the Assembly member is working on for this session. And we are starting to outreach to different groups in the area and trying to get feedback on the proposal, trying to see how we can improve it. So if you all would like to learn more about it, please feel free to shoot me an email. I think that Anna is going to drop my email into the chat. So please feel free to reach out. If you have any additional questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. And Tom's email is being shared with all participants in the meeting right now. So we are now on agenda item 3, which is a time for advisory group members who are here as panelists to ask questions and discuss. And I'm going to ask again that you please use the Zoom raise hand feature if you'd like to ask a question, and then I'll invite you to unmute your line. I'll do my best to keep track of the queue. We have several questions that are also coming in from the public, from the attendees, and I will be calling on and verbalizing some of those in agenda item number 4 after this first session of advisory group. So if advisory group members would like to take a moment to raise your hand with a comment or a question, and just as a reminder, if you could please introduce yourself as you are asking your question or making your comment, so that more people can, so that folks who may be only listening by audio on the phone can know who's speaking during that time. I'm looking to the panelist list, and I see that Dr. Jim Wells has his hand raised. Please go ahead and unmute your line, Jim.
I do. Thanks, Anna. Can folks hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. 2 questions, if I could. One related to Hortensia's presentation. And my question is, where do we find the completion letters? And where are the confirmation samples documented that are described? Are they added to the master database, or are they kept in some other database? I probably should know the answer to that, but it crosses my mind that I'm not aware of seeing the confirmation data. My second question relates to this really wonderful legislative proposal. And I guess my initial question to that is, how does the state's proposed funding for on-site cleanup, how does that work with respect to the obligations of this new Vernon Trust that was created out of Exide's bankruptcy?
Thank you, Dr. Wells, for both questions. And Dr. Wells is the technical advisor to the advisory group. I'll ask for that first one, if you could please address that first question, Hortensia. And
Okay.
the second question, I'll invite Grant Cope to follow.
Okay, so the letters of completion are property specific, and we have not made those public to everyone other than to the property owner or to the resident if the property owner agrees to it. So each of the letters of completion do address all of the prior sampling that has occurred at the property, and then of course any pre-excavation confirmation samples that was done, any air monitoring that was done during the cleanup, and it's documented in that letter of completion. Confirmation samples, yes, so it's included. In terms of it being included for characterization of the wider, for example, the PIA, no, it has not. We have not looked at it that way. We have, so for example, when we did the initial sampling, that was used to see if they could sort of identify a trend, but there was not. And so right now the samples are pretty much just focused on that one parcel, to define the excavation depths and boundaries. And that's it.
Thank you, Hortensia. And on the question related—
Did that answer your question? Thank you.
on the question related to budget that Dr. Wells had, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, hi, good evening, Dr. Wells. In terms of appropriations from the state, the legislature is obviously well within the right to authorize funds to be used both on the site as well as certainly in the residential areas. If they appropriate funds to be used for the facility, the former facility itself, they can do so, and those funds can be made available to the trust. Does that answer the question?
I guess if I could just have a quick follow-up. I think it would seem unfair if all of us taxpayers are going to fund a healthy chunk of the on-site cleanup, and then the Vernon Trust is left with an asset that's worth a lot more because we cleaned it up.
You mean in terms of recovering the cleanup costs? So cost recovery?
In terms of presumably they have ownership of that property and they're going to dispose of it. They're going to sell it at some point. So we're increasing the value of that asset and they're going to sell it for a higher price.
Yeah, so this often happens where there's an orphan site without a responsible party that's there and available to pay. The state will step in to use resources to conduct funding. Currently, we're using the financial assurance funds from Exide. The legislature can, as they have with the residential area, provide funds for work at the former facility. We would, consistent with the litigation that we've filed already, pursue cost recovery for those costs as well as costs in the residential area. So we're taking steps now to hold the taxpayer, the money that they've provided for the cleanups, to get that back from responsible parties. There is the process of bringing in a prospective purchaser is essentially one that they make a commitment to do work at a site. Granting a prospective purchaser agreement is discretionary. One of the key factors is what is the benefit to the community? And therefore, any prospective purchaser that would be successful would have to make a case that they're going to be contributing their work at that site in a way that benefits the community. Does that answer the kind of factors in terms of the taxpayers? Yeah, if the legislature appropriated funds, we would see cost recovery. If a prospective purchaser comes in, we would expect them to have a proposal that would benefit the community. And then currently, right now, obviously, we're using financial assurance monies.
I'm not a lawyer, but I guess I would just urge Dtsc to not get into a situation where this entity that was created out of the bankruptcy, the Vernon Trust, becomes a beneficiary of our hard-earned dollars that might be applied to cleaning up that site, which they own.
Yeah. So the trust is a unique entity. It has one sole purpose. That's to clean up the site. It can do that so long as it has funds. But its sole purpose is to actually clean up the site. And so it's not
responsible
profit.
for cleaning up the site.
Right.
You can't name it a responsible party.
Right. It is purely there. It's a creation. Trusts do this. It's frequent. It's a tool that's frequently used. But they're not there as a money-making enterprise for profit. They're there specifically to clean up the site. That's their purpose.
I'm going to jump in for 1 second. I know that there is some overlap, but the discussion is going a little more towards the facility, and we are trying to keep more of the residential cleanup questions, even though there's some intersection to this first portion. So there are two people. Thank you, Dr. Wells, and thank you, Grant. Two people have their hand raised. I'm going to invite to share their question or comment. First, Rania, and then after going to a comment submitted by Felipe. Please, Rania.
Hello. Hi. I'm Dr. Rania Septi, with a professor at Cal State University Northridge and also collaborator with the UCLA Labor Occupational Safety and Health Program. So my first question is about the 19 daycares that remain to be cleaned. I understand and realize, and you guys shared that you are trying to pursue the facilities. I'm assuming these are home-based daycares, and maybe that is why they're a bit harder to reach. It's just an assumption. And I'm just wondering how much of a priority and intensity in trying to reach them is happening because they are housing the absolute most vulnerable of our population that is exposed to lead, and they need to be protected the most and most urgently. So, just wondering how much you are really pursuing those daycares as opposed to all the other properties which you did share with us that you are contacting. That's one. And the second part, and I don't know if that was meant to be addressed later, and I'm willing to wait for that, but I get, it's workers' health and safety does seem to always have a magical way of dropping by the wayside when things and resources become scarce. And so with this, new budget, new funding mechanism, the bankruptcy and all that, even within the residential cleanup, I'd like that we continue to talk about how workers are kept in their health and safety. The mechanisms, are they being trained? Is there a new workforce being hired? Or are you still relying on the old workforce that was hired? How are they being trained? I cannot but worry about that with the switch of the landscape. They tend to be some of the first people to be dropped out of the priority list. And I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the importance of their protection. And I'm willing to wait if that was going to come up in another presentation, but I'd love that somehow we not forget to talk about it. And, we have a history of bringing that up before. I don't need to remind anyone of that, but I have not forgotten about it. And I do care to know. And so that's it.
Okay, well, I'll take the first one. Efforts regarding the daycares. The number of daycares can fluctuate within the PIA because new property owners or individuals that move in or renters that move in may elect to get licensed as a licensed daycare facility, and they can't get licensed, so they may not be or flagged in prior efforts. And so those 19 that are flagged right now, they have been contacted. All of them have agreed to clean up. They're all being scheduled to be cleaned up. We take it very seriously, and we do have sent letters out informing them that we would reach out to the licensing agency to assist us if necessary, and they all willingly responded. So yes, we share your concern. In terms of the workers' health and safety, the scarcity of funds we also take that very seriously. As we mentioned, the health and safety plans were revised to address COVID-19. The contractor, we returned to the field with one contractor, and they have protocols to address COVID-19. We have not scaled back on any of the other health and safety issues to protect the workforce. They have received the training, obviously, for the COVID-19. Being trained, I'm not sure specifically which area you're referring to being trained, and what is not dropped of priority. That I would need some further details on that so that I can provide you an answer on that.
I was thinking of HAZWOPER training and lead particular related training in particular. Soon it will be working under heat conditions will be another one of concern. Maybe we're not there quite yet, but it will be soon. So mostly HAZWOPER kind of training. Refreshers, are they getting their yearly refreshers? If they are HAZWOPER certified, and lead specific training?
They are. HAZWOPER training is one of the requirements to be on site. I mean, you have to take the 40-hour and then an annual 8-hour refresher. The lead training, I do not know to what detail how many are certified lead assessors, because there's different graduations of being lead certified. So I would not know the details of how many are lead certified. So I would need to follow up on that. But in terms of HAZWOPER training and the typical training that's required to be on site of a hazardous waste site, they all receive that, and they're all required to have annual refreshers.
Thank you, Randy, for your questions and Hortensia. And I'll make a quick note before moving to the advisory group members with their hands raised. Felipe made a note in our chat about of the properties cleaned up, how many are single family homes, how many are multi-unit apartments. I'll request to make a note for DTSC that we provide additional data if we can about single unit versus multi-unit as some of the conversation with the advisory group today. Next, I will go to Jennifer Ganada. If you could please introduce yourself and feel free to ask your question or make your comment.
Hi, this is Jennifer Ganada. I'm a community for better environment. I kind of follow.
And your audio is cutting in and out. If there's anything you could do to adjust it so we can hear you.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I wanted to follow up on the labor piece and kind of going back to those that are on the field that are doing the cleanup. Is this just the contractors, or are there employees with the contractors from DTSC specific? So I'm wondering how many of the workers that are on site are actually contracted out or actually employees of DTSC. And then to follow that up, for the safety protocols, when people are going out, how often are the people who are on the fields being tested for COVID? I know that you talked about some like just having guidelines and abiding by the rules with COVID, but I just wanted to get a little bit more information in terms of the protections for the workers who are on site cleaning up the residents.
So in terms of the labor force and who's on the field, there's both. So the contractor provides the bulk of the workers. I mean, they're all, your typical crew has 5 or 6 individuals and they're responsible at each property to clean up the property. Then we will have a DTSC representative that goes from property to property, doing just spontaneous inspections of what's going on. Are the things being done according to plan, et cetera. And that is the frequency and the times is varied depending on the schedule. And that is something that I will reach out to Medi, who can assist in responding, providing more detail on that. In terms of how often are they tested for COVID, actually, I had a slide on that. I took it out because I thought we had talked about it but so every day, twice a day, they all take their body temperature when they come in the morning and after lunch. They are not allowed to congregate. They all have to eat separate. They're not allowed to share equipment. And then they decon and wipe all of the samples, the handles and all of the equipment. I mean, not the samples, the equipment, all the handles of the equipment on an hourly basis. There has been incidences of COVID where someone has tested positive, and then the whole crew is tested. We've been pleased to see that all of the protocols that have been put in place have worked, because some of these individuals have been exposed at home, and yet when they come to work, they did not infect anyone else on the crew. And so they would get tested, got quarantined, but they never displayed any COVID symptoms, and they never tested positive. And so once they pass the quarantine, then they come back, they get retested, and then when they're negative, then they can return to work.
Thank you, Hortensia. And I'll, before inviting Medi to introduce himself and also share on the questions that you have, I'm just going to note that I would like to move to some of the public questions and comments that are coming in. We're about 5 minutes behind our agenda schedule. So at about 6:20, I'd like to turn to some of the questions from our public attendees. So if you do have a question as an advisory group member, please raise your hand now so we can work in the queue. Next up, we have, next, Medi, if you could please introduce yourself and follow on anything you may have there.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. My name is Medi Betahar. I manage the residential cleanup operations for DTSC. And I think I want to go back to the question that Dr. Sapti has asked, because it's all related. And the second person who asked similar question about health and safety. Be assured that it's front and center of what we do. We don't just have protocols and we apply them at work and walk away. We are building a culture of safety where everybody is aware that this COVID does not stop at the limit of the site. we have to carry these protocols at home. We have to be safe. Their families have to be safe. The community has to be safe. So when you look at it, every cell or every group work individually. This is like a micro bubble. They live on their own. If we happen to have one single hit, everybody get quarantined, everybody get tested. Now, knock on wood, the last 4 to 6 weeks, we haven't seen anything. This is a very, very good sign. And I understand where Dr. Sapti is coming from. It's not just a matter of establishing properties that are compliant with CDC or even the local health departments. It's making sure that we're building a culture that is sustainable, that can avoid people from getting infected, and furthermore, an outbreak that nobody wants to see.
Thank you. We'll go to Mark next, and then back to Rania, and then we'll open up for the public comments and questions, please. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, Rania, you've been very consistent about bringing up wanting to make sure that we don't lose sight of the health of the workers. And it isn't just COVID, it's even from before COVID. And so I'm wondering if you would be interested, and of course, the agency would need to be down for that too. But if we did like an ad hoc committee or session where we could really dig into the weeds of this, because I know there's a couple of ECR members that are part of the cleanup workforce. And so they've raised stuff, and, there's things that are supposed to happen, and then there's what really happens in the field. And so I think that there would be, that would be a good opportunity to get into the weeds of this stuff. And then maybe we can bring that back to a future advisory group meeting. So I'm wondering if you'd be interested in that. Two, and I think this is part of what Jen from CBE was raising around who's doing the work. And I think we've noticed a shift. I've noticed it very recently around some of the outreach being done by contractors as opposed to DTSC staff. And I'm not sure if this is in part due to some of the transition of DTSC staff, right? Because there's been some transition more recently. And so I guess I would ask for y'all to lean on some of us that have been engaging in this process to maybe provide some support, because I know I've been hit up already by some community members who just had bad interactions with some of the contractors who essentially are working for the cleanup contractors, right? And so there's a little bit of conflict of interest in there as well. And then the last thing I wanted to share, because I think, TS, I'm not sure who TS is, asked, why can't we see the questions on the chat? I think they might be referring to some of the conversation that was happening in the chat. Felipe asked a question, but I believe it only went to panelists. It didn't go to panelists and attendees. My response was to panelists and attendees, so that might be some of the confusion. I do want to read the question just so that it's clear what it was. So of the 600 properties that have not been cleaned up, how many are single family homes and how many are multi-unit apartments? Which I believe Anna already addressed as far as getting that information. But just, I guess, a logistical thing. I know for me as a panelist, I don't think I can ask a question. I'm looking on the feature, the Q&A feature, and I don't see where I can submit a question or a comment other than responding to people's questions already in there. So that might be something that, after the meeting, we can troubleshoot.
Thank you for letting us know on that. And there were a couple pieces. I know first starting with kind of Mark asking a question to Rania, so I'll hand it over to you in just a moment. But I appreciate your comments, Mark, and we can definitely talk more about how the project communicates and leans on a lot of the expertise and experience, obviously, with community organizations who are part of this advisory group and other members of the advisory group here. So I will hand it over to Rania to respond and share the question she has. Unless I'm missing anything, Mark, just go ahead, feel free to pop in again if I'm missing something. I think those are the two topics. Okay, go ahead, Rania.
So Mark, I would be happy to do that. In fact, it would be really a wonderful idea. I think it's time. It's just really hard to tackle some of these in-depth issues without just a very superficial exchange at these meetings, as when it comes to, health and safety and particularly bringing workers that are currently working, or maybe somebody on the contractor side and health and safety team. It's an opportunity to contribute, to point out things, to hear, so that we're not constantly, taking time away from this meeting for things that really there's no time to answer them. So I'm open to that. I would love it. And I think it's a great idea. So I'm all game for that. The other thought
Rania, real quick before you get into that other thought, I'm wondering if we can identify who from DTSC will follow up, with Rania, with myself, and any other advisory members who would be interested in that session. That way we don't end up at the next meeting and we haven't done that. So who at DTSC could we look to follow up with that?
Sure. I'll suggest as facilitator from DTSC as well, Mehdi, if you could help follow up on this request and discussion around an ad hoc group.
And I think it'd be great if we could do it before the next meeting. So, so that we have something to bring to the group the next time we meet, which will be in April, I think, right? Did I get that right?
May is what's on the calendar.
So yeah, I'd like that we meet before then, so we have something to present to the group. My other thought is again about workers' health and safety, but this is very COVID related. So I don't know how workers in this cleanup work are considered to be according to the categories of vaccination eligibility, but I know that March 15 becomes available for people with health conditions, but also because of work conditions that put them at risk. And if that makes the cleanup workers eligible, is DTSC willing, interested? Do you have a plan to make vaccination available to them ASAP without it being so complicated? Can we make it so available when they come to work in a very simplified path? I'm trying to sign up myself, and it's not a simple process. And I would love that we take that barrier away from the workers, if possible. That's all.
Thank you, Rania. I know that there are a number of factors in how vaccines are being distributed. Your first question, though, is, I think, around what tier that workers on the project may fall into. And I think, Grant, you just turned on your video to perhaps start answering that question. And then we'll need to also follow up on that as well. Go ahead, Grant.
No, I would leave that to Mehdi. I was going to get back to Mark on an issue that he raised.
Okay. Mehdi, is there anything you'd like to share in response to Rania's comment around the vaccines?
I know that currently everybody is listed under 1C. I think that's where the priority is at this point. Those are we're in the field of hazardous waste, and that is listed by the county as 1C. I think everybody is hoping to get that vaccine as quickly as possible. And yes, people who are in the field should have that priority. I agree that if anything can be done to help them, we will do our very best to do that.
Thank you. It would be great to facilitate their access to shots.
Thank you, Rania.
At the minimum, walk them through the administrative hurdle, because I have tried to get vaccinated too, and yes, it's not simple. You have to navigate the online system. So,
thank you. And Grant, we're going to share something in response to Mark's comment?
Yeah, Mark, in terms of the poor interactions that people have had with contractors, we hold everybody responsible for interacting in a professional fashion with people. So obviously, it's your information. I would encourage you, though, to provide whatever information you have so that we could follow up, take a look at the interaction, and then correct any problems that we found, and we'd get back to the ETAG or certainly you with the follow-up that we did. Obviously, that's up to you, but it's very important to us that everybody, our staff as well as contractors, are conducting themselves professionally and with an eye towards cleaning up as many properties as possible.
Yeah, thank you for that, Grant. I just because of some of the transition in DTSC staff, the person who I typically would go to kind of let them know of this type of stuff isn't with the agency anymore. So, and I know there's in process, as far as filling that position. So definitely we'll do that.
You can call me or Mehdi. We're here. We can talk whenever.
So can we go ahead and think about planning a meeting like Mark talked about? Is there going to be a follow-up in the very short future about that?
Yeah, I had tagged Mehdi a bit earlier. I think we can follow up with you within the next week, unless you suggest a different process, Mehdi.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we'll have to follow up with you sometime next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have now a couple minutes behind on our agenda. Thank you for your patience, everyone. We're going to move to agenda item number 4, which is public comments and questions. And we're hoping to focus on the residential cleanup activities, since the next portion of our meeting tonight is focused on the facility. And thank you again very much for all your patience, people who are participating as attendees. We've had some questions entered into our Q&A box, and have been patiently waiting. So if you are an attendee and would like to verbalize your question, please use the Zoom function to raise your hand. Or if you're on the phone audio with Zoom, you could press *9. So I see several people joining the queue. I'm going to go to first some of the questions in the Q&A box, and then ask some of the questions for folks who have raised their hands. We'll do our best to get to the comments and questions. We've allocated about 10 minutes for this section, so thank you in advance for your patience if we don't get to everyone's questions right now. The first question in our Q&A box is from Vanessa Ramirez, and for those who are on Zoom, you can read her full question. Studies have shown it is more effective to develop a comprehensive treatment approach of treating large areas at once to control dust from contaminated adjacent properties or on recontaminating treated sites. So for Exide, even though there are properties being cleaned, the dust generated from the soil is contaminating neighboring properties and maybe recontaminating remediated sites. There has to be a better method of remediating the homes, and wondering if this will be considered, as the current method of remediating homes isn't that effective. I'm going to invite Hortensia, if you might want to address that comment left by Venezia.
So originally our cleanup plan did contemplate cleaning up properties, say on a street by street basis, if possible. As all of you are aware, the properties are actually being cleaned up based on a prioritization scheme of those properties that were sampled and their concentrations were above a certain concentration. Initially, it was 400, and later it was at 300 parts per million. So there's some kind of some areas where some homes that are contaminated above those concentrations and others that are not. And in terms of whether there's an issue regarding cleaning up one property and then not the adjoining property, currently, we do air monitoring during all site activities, and there is a no visible dust requirement, so that whenever there is dust being generated at the excavated area, that they stop activities, wet down the soils, and then continue. All of that information is summarized in the letters of completion that are done at each of the homes. So if someone was interested in seeing what happened at their property, and whether there was contamination later on at an adjoining property. We don't expect that to occur because we are not generating dust that would potentially cross-contaminate at other properties.
Thank you, Hortensia. I'm going to move to the next question that was entered early on in this meeting by Julia Stein. What kind of canvassing and phone outreach has been done with respect to the community survey that informs the human health risk assessment? The survey has been reopened online, but are physical surveys being mailed out, and or have other attempts been made to contact property owners and the PIA to fill out the survey? Go ahead, Hortensia.
Yes, so we have met with the contractor that is working with us to finalize the human health risk assessment. We are also very interested in receiving more input, because 300 respondents or thereabout, it's really not sufficient. It's not representative. We've never believed that it was. And we've always been looking for ways to get more information. Unfortunately, when we were first planning to be out in the field canvassing, that's when COVID hit. And so we had to put our plans to rest or on hold. And now that things are kind of calming down, that there's more of an opportunity for us to get out in the field and do canvassing, we will be doing that. The survey may be a little bit different, and we've talked about ways to either make the two surveys into one so that we could combine the results. But that is still being considered. It is open. If someone uses it, we will still take that information. We will generate a survey where is mailed out to the properties, and then also those instances where there will be canvassing. We are interested in getting as much information as possible for the Parkways.
Thank you, Hortensia. And I'm going to move to participant who has entered a couple Q&A chats, Lupe Alvarado. I see that you have your hand raised on the audio, so I'm going to unmute your line so that you can share your comment with DTSC. And
yes.
you guys okay?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
You know, we had our property worked on around July or August, and while they were working on the property, they broke the water main, and they broke it a couple of times. We didn't think anything of it, and over the weekend there was a big water pool on our front lawn. When they came back on Monday, they were great. They fixed it. They told us not to worry about it. But then once they left the job and we got the water bill, it was very high. We contacted the office several times, and we haven't gotten any responses. Everyone says they're going to contact the contractor. The contractor hasn't responded, and we're stuck with a very high water bill. Along with that, I've been noticing that some of the work they did in planting, plants where they did the work, they didn't necessarily put the whole weed barrier the way they were supposed to do. So kind of questioning the kind of work they actually are doing.
Thank you, Lupe, for your comment. I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. I'm going to invite Mehdi Betahar to respond to your comment this evening.
We are going to need more information about the property. It's never good news when you have, I would say, out of 100 property, one that's not okay, we have to respond to it right away. That is our commitment to you. So if you could please share your information, I think with Teresa, correct, Anna? If someone can take the information, and I will follow up.
Yes, Lupe, if you can send us a private message, you can share so we can get your direct contact information, and we have your email address. We can follow up with you within the next 2 days. I'm going to invite Mr. Rafael Llanes to as next in the phone queue. If you'd like to share your question or comment, please.
Hi, good evening. So there's a couple of items doing stuff like this.
Good evening, Rafael. Your audio is breaking up a little bit. Is there any way you can adjust it?
You bet. Is that better?
It's not too much better.
Oh, sorry. Why don't you come back to me? I'll try to call in on a different line.
Okay. We will wait for you to call in. And I will go back to one of our questions on the Q&A, and I'm seeing, we appreciate everyone's patience. This is the first time we are having the advisory group meeting with the Q&A and many things going. So I'm reading off the questions from the Q&A box. And I understand that that's the setting for this particular meeting, hearing feedback that you might want to see the Q&A box as all the participants for future meetings. So thank you for bearing with us on that. Laura asks, Mr. Cope, can your information be made available for resolving issues between contractors and cleanup families? I'll invite Grant Cope to answer that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend, though, that it's not just me, that it's also Mehdi. He's the person who's best kind of, you can call me or email, either one, but he's the person who's kind of on the job every day overseeing the project. So my email is grant, G-R-A-N-T, .cope, C-O-P-E, at dtsc.gov. ca.gov. And Mehdi, do you want to give your email address?
I'm sorry, I was trying to talk to myself. I can answer the question directly if that's more convenient for everybody. I would provide as an answer to the question my email address.
Yes, and thank you, Jerry. One of our meeting managers here is actually putting that in the chat so that all participants can see it as well. I'd like to acknowledge and thank a Q&A that was submitted as well from TS. This was, I believe, in regards to the worker safety conversation when the advisory group discussion was taking place. And TS comments, we would like that to be on the agenda on the next meeting so the public can follow up with how DTSC practices worker safety. So thank you for your comment, TS, and we're noting that here. I'm going to go back to our hands raised and to make sure that we can also share the information related to the facility. I'm going to take several more questions on hands raised and then move into the facility portion. I apologize, we're a little bit behind on where we hope to be on the agenda timing. If I could please ask Dtsc as the attendee to unmute your line and share your comment or question.
Yes, hi, good evening. I'm calling on behalf of my parents, Estela and Jesus Ayala, who live in Maywood and whose project was completed back in October. And at that point, they had agreed, or more my mom, because my father is ill, for there to be a 6-inch border along two sides of their lawn. And unfortunately, at that time, that border was supposed to be filled in with large white rock, and it was not available at that time. But because of the trip hazard that it could possibly create for my mom, who is barely mobile and able to walks on a cane, it was agreed that a smaller white rock would be put in place so that at least there would not be a gap for however many months that it would take for the large white rock to become available. It is now several months later, and that small white rock is not. Oh, and at that point, the understanding was once the large white rock would come in, and if my mother was not satisfied with the small white rock, it would be no problem to exchange it. And so at this point, it's been months, and that small white rock has proven to be extremely, extremely troublesome. Not only is it a trip hazard for her, because every time she waters, it comes like it splatters not only onto the grass, but onto her walkway. It splatters onto the sidewalk. So it's a trip hazard for her. It's a trip hazard for people walking down the sidewalk. The person that she wants to hire as a gardener says that he will not cut her grass because those little rocks will ruin his machinery. And so my mom is now sweeping her walkway, sweeping the sidewalk 2 to 3 times a week. And once again, she's on a cane in her 80s, and she's doing this, like I said, 2 or 3 times a week. And at this point, it has become extremely frustrated because it's been very difficult to get a hold of anybody. But fortunately today, Jeff Mueller came to check out the property, and he pretty much said that the only option he could offer her was to remove 1/4 inch off the rock, off a layer of the rock, so that it wouldn't splatter onto, the sidewalk or the walkway. But that is not what she wants. She wants it now to be replaced with a heavy rock, a rock that won't keep moving and her having to sweep and her possibly falling on it. So I'm here because it's been months since the project was completed, and it's been very difficult to get answers. And even the answer that was provided today, or possible solution, is not what she wants. And when this project was was presented to my mom, it was like, whatever, you guys are the owners of this property. We will make everything that we can do to make you guys happy. And now it's like, well, this is what it is, and there's no other solution but just to take off 1/4 inch of this rock. And believe you me, I do not believe that that's going to be the solution, and I don't know what else to do. So that's why I'm here expressing my concern on behalf of her, because she wants this to be dealt with as soon as possible, because she's been a few months now of just cleaning up the small white rock. So I'm trying to find a solution here for her on her behalf.
Understand. Thank you, Teresa, very much for joining and sharing that. And I'm sorry that you're experiencing that continued frustration. I know that, as you mentioned, there was a couple of our team members visited your property today. If there's anything else you'd like to follow up on, Mehdi, I'll invite you to do so.
No, I think the only important thing is that I wanted to add that COVID-19 has affected us in many ways. It's not just on the daily and how we're doing business, but it's also in the supply sometimes. And that white rock that was promised a long time ago have come to stop because the quarry has been affected. It's my understanding that rock is being brought by Arizona, and that quarry is being affected and is no longer acting or working. So this is why it took so long. But I am happy to see that you have received people from Dtsc who have heard your concern and came to visit. We haven't had a chance, neither Anna or myself, to hear what they have seen and what the discussion is about, but we will follow up with them.
Thank you. We'll be following up with you in the coming days, Teresa. So I, as facilitator, I'm sorry, a bit behind on our schedule. I know that Rafael dropped because of the audio. I'm going to ask Rafael to be the speaker for this public comment session, the last speaker, and then we'll move to the presentations on facility so that we can share everyone and hopefully respect everyone's time here this evening. Rafael, if you could please unmute your line.
You bet. Thank you. Can you hear me better?
Yes, much
Great.
better.
Right. All right. So there's a couple of things that in regards to property testing, I'm looking at the various like Estrada courts, the public housing, the Wyvern Wood Garden Apartment. Has that area been tested? And then the next question would be, if they haven't, when will they? What's the remediation plan for that? Because, the concern is public housing. I know, we're moving on to, there was a presentation on the schools and the parks and all that other stuff. And by the way, I would love to get information in regarding sampling results for the areas around the schools. So if someone could follow up with me, I know at the previous meeting, at the local government meeting, I was going to obtain some information in regards to the actual site, which is coming up next. But I need the information on the schools now in and around them because it will affect projects being planned by the city. And then my last comment would be in regards to budget, because of the now announced $10 billion surplus here in the state of California, plus the impending what is that, $42 billion that's going to be coming to the state of California through the stimulus. I'm hoping that some of this from the environmental cleanup standpoint, I'm hoping some of this can be presented to this particular community specifically for the cleanup efforts, because our concern, of course, is the various options that have been presented to us for the parkways and whatnot, and then the varying levels that trigger the cleanup effort, whether it be 300 parts per million or the 80 parts per million originally promised by Dtsc very early on in the cleanup process.
Thank you, Rafael. I'll see if Hortensia, regarding the question on information related to schools, if I could please ask you to follow up on behalf of Dtsc for that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you also mentioned public housing information and what are the plans for sampling and budget. So if there's anything related to Wyvernwood or Hecla, I would invite Hortensia or Mehdi to share. And then Grant, if you'd like to share anything else on budget, and then we'll move to the facility presentations.
Okay, so I'll take the sampling that occurred at Wyvernwood and Estrada courts. Wyvernwood has been sampled. It was sampled originally for prioritization in 2018. We identified about 300 decision units, and of those decision units, we identified those that would qualify for the cleanup based on the current prioritization criteria. We have sampled those as well so that we could ready them for cleanup. Estrada Courts is in the same category. It's a little bit smaller facility or housing facility that is also being sampled. And as the results are received, we will prioritize those for cleanup contingent funding being available. And then in regards to the schools, I will follow up regarding the schools and any concentrations detected around the schools. And I presume you're saying with the Parkway samples, is that what you're referring to? Rafael?
Yes, I'm sorry. Correct. But I'm talking, also overall. So there was question in regards to the cleanup levels in terms of what would trigger from the 300 parts per million versus the 80 parts per million. And I guess because, there was public housing involved in there, that triggering level, it seems like that would be appropriate to trigger the cleanup efforts in and around public housing as well.
Oh, okay. Yes. So I guess I was looking at them at two separate questions. So when you're asking for results regarding the schools, the additional information you want it from the information that you're seeking is the information we obtained while we were doing the Parkways investigation?
No. That was because the schools were sampled separately.
Yes. So
Yes, I'm looking for the schools in the properties around the schools, immediate properties around the schools. So, I would imagine it would be the areas surrounding the schools, like for instance, at the fence line and whatnot.
Okay, I'll see what we can do.
If I could jump in, I'm wondering if Rafa, like a heat map might be helpful, right? So, because that's kind of.
No, I'm looking for the actual data. Yeah, because okay. I have our scientists now looking at the specific data. So we're looking for data set.
Okay, well, I'll look into it to see what we can provide. I don't know that, but what we can talk to see what we can provide on that. And so then the separate question was regarding the Parkways and the cleanup goal. was your other question?
No, I guess you can move on. Given that the Waverwood, the Garden Apartments, and then the Estrada. Thank you. And then the Estrada Courts. You said sampling's been taken there, and so you guys are evaluating the cleanup effort that is needing to be taken after having identified. The next thing would be the budget, and given the budget surplus that the state of California has and the incoming stimulus money, we're looking to see, because of the Exide, help me out, the trust fund that was established through the courts, which was so small, we're going to run out of money here pretty quick. So the question is what will DTSC be doing to secure more funding, given all these additional funds now from the state of California, and getting some of the money back that was previously appropriated for this project?
And so I think Anna was. There's Grant. I see Grant now. Okay.
Yeah, I'll kick it to Meredith on the larger budget issues. I would just mention that the governor's proposed $31 million of additional funds to clean 3,200 properties. That's part of the budget proposal. In terms of the larger budget issues, I will definitely kick it to Meredith.
And I would just add that it is a very dynamic budget situation this year. And as a result, things will continue to evolve. Unfortunately, the budget process is confidential, and given that the stimulus was just announced, we certainly haven't had time to really think through what that's going to look like in terms of additional spending. But I will just say what we've said before, that the community has done a great job advocating for itself, about the urgency of the cleanup and the urgency of getting this work done. Lead obviously is something that's a huge priority, especially when we're thinking about equity issues in terms of remediating contaminated properties. So we'll just have to see how the budget process unfolds. But clearly, everyone is in the administration and in the legislature, as you heard from Assemblymember Santiago's office, is very well aware of the importance of continuing to do as much cleanup as we can on the site.
Thank you. I unfortunately was kicked out of Zoom for a moment and just came back in, but I think this is a good point, and I thank everyone for your patience since we have more hands up from the public. I'm going to ask that we move to the presentations on the facility project. So BZ, if you could please move to the next slide. We'll have our next set of presentations, and then item 6 is advisory group member discussion again, and then number 7 and 8 will open back up for public comment. With that, I will hand it over to Amanda Cruz of US EPA. Go ahead, Amanda.
Good evening. Thank you. Again, my name is Amanda Cruz, and I am honored to be here tonight on behalf of the US EPA to provide an update on the facility closure progress. EPA is involved in overseeing the work that is being done by the trust. And the purpose of the trust is to address environmental contamination at the former Exide facility. And this work is being done in a way that will protect the surrounding community. EPA is working collaboratively with Dtsc, and Dtsc continues to be a key decision maker in the facility closeout. Next slide, please. We have made tremendous progress on the deconstruction of the smelter structure with full community protective measures in place, and we've had no perimeter air monitoring exceedances during our work. People are being protected from contamination from this facility at this time, and they will continue to be protected into the future. I'd like to go over a little bit what the photo is showing. So segment 1, which is on the left, is completely down. And then segment 2 is on the right, and that is actually down also. What you see in the photo, that is the full enclosure unit still in place. And we have started enclosing segment 3. This is a pretty recent photo, and we've actually started the deconstruction activities on segment 3. Roberto from the trust will be talking next. He will show some detailed photos and then go over some more of the specifics about how the work has been done, ensuring protectiveness for the community, and the air monitoring results that we have. Next slide, please. So with the available funds, we will be able to safely deconstruct the smelter building complex, which is segment 2 and 3 left, and 2 of the hazardous waste, which we would call a RCRA, container storage building. Additionally, we will be able to decontaminate the remaining RCRA, hazardous waste, container storage building, and the wastewater treatment plant, and do a final cleaning on the surface impoundment. This work is expected to be completed by the end of 2021. Next slide. And then continuing into 2022 and into 2023, available funds will allow us to have 2 years of what I'm going to call an operational level of air monitoring and wastewater treatment plant operation and site security. And what I mean by that is that both the air monitoring program and the wastewater treatment plant operation are working in the same way that they did when the plant was operational as a full smelter. To keep these running, it will cost approximately $5.2 million for those 2 years. So we are trying to evaluate some ways to scale the costs to appropriately address the current conditions at the property, which is no longer any operations on site, while ensuring that the community is protected. If we are able to save any funds from those 2 years of O&M, then we could use those funds to further decontamination efforts. Next slide, please. To follow up from January meeting, at that time I discussed the plan to decontaminate the supporting buildings that did not handle any hazardous waste under the RCRA permit. We call those the ancillary buildings. During the planning phase of our project, the South Coast Air Quality Management District determined additional work to be required. And that additional work, which consisted of fully enclosed units, would cost approximately $7 million. And these are funds that the trust does not have. As a result of that decision, we have determined that the ancillary buildings will be boarded up and they will be left as is. And Jason from AQMD, he'll be talking later in this presentation, and he can provide some context about how decisions are made regarding this work. And then also during the January meeting, there were questions and concerns regarding the groundwater at the facility. In response to those public concerns, Dtsc is currently performing a thorough review of the data. And all of the groundwater data is available online for review currently if anyone is interested. The discussion on the Dtsc evaluation will be held during the May public meeting. And the last topic I wanted to talk about tonight is the brokers. Meetings have been held with the real estate broker and potential interested parties to determine the end game of the project. We are going through this effort in an attempt to secure a future use for the property and jobs for the community. We have screened the buyers to make sure that they understand the regulatory obligations on the facility and that they will be respecting any environmental restrictions that would be put in place to be protective of the community. We will continue to provide notification on the progress of the sale at these regular community meetings. It's also important to note that with complex sites such as these, the time frame for these agreements can be lengthy and sometimes taking 1 or more years. And there will be public discussion during the agreement process with the agencies. We have included those 2 years of contingency, operation and maintenance of the facility to account for the contingencies in the future use of the property. Thank you for your time tonight, and I look forward to continued working with you at future meetings. So I'd like to pass it over to Roberto next.
Good evening, everyone. In my presentation, I will walk through and highlight and illustrate some of the points that Amanda just made to give you a better feel for, the type of work that we're doing, what's inside these mysterious full enclosure units and what they look like once the decontamination and deconstruction work is completed within them. Next slide, please. On this plan view, I just wanted to illustrate, how many buildings there are at the site, and then, how we plan to address them with the current amount of funds that we have available to us. Amanda went through segments 1, 2, and 3. Those are the gray stippled buildings, and those were the main industrial buildings. They were the smelter, the lead recycling unit, and the bag house. Those were the main industrial buildings on the facility, and all of those will be completely decontaminated and deconstructed underneath a full enclosure unit. There's also a couple of smaller spots that are also stippled, and they will be handled in the same manner. The facilities that are shown in the greenish pattern, those will be decontaminated, but will remain standing. And those that are shown in blue are the ancillary units, so those are support buildings, and those will be boarded up so that they're not available for ingress by anyone. And they will await further work once funds become available. Next slide, please. Again, this is just so that the next few slides fall into context in terms of location on the property. Again, as Amanda pointed out, these are the main industrial units. You see the FEU, you see the segments 1, which was the old lead recycling area, 2, which was the lead smelter itself, and 3, which is the remaining segment to be worked on, is the bag house unit. Next slide, please. And here's just some pictures of the segment 2, the smelter building. The first picture is from December 2018. You can see that the machinery and industrial infrastructure within the smelter building is still intact. And this is before any of the work began. The picture from October 2020, this is the condition of smelter building when the trust took over. And then the March 2021 picture shows the work completed. So all of the infrastructure has been decontaminated and deconstructed and taken away. And the property has been paved so that it matches the paving scheme that you saw on segment 1. What you see still erected is the FEU, the full enclosure unit, but it doesn't enclose anything. And we're currently in transition between segment 2 onto segment 3. Next slide, please. And this is another picture showing from 2019. These are the Kettle Gallery basement pictures. This is the subfloor beneath the floor segment 2 that I just showed you in the previous photographs. You can see the conditions in the basement, dusty, with a lot of infrastructure. And then you can see what it looks like after we went in and did the decontamination. So we pressure washed, we scraped loose paint, and then we put a protective encapsulant coating on the remaining structures. Next slide, please. And then this is segment 3. It's the segment 3 corridor. It's the part of segment 3 that we've already placed an FEU over and have begun work in. You can see what it looked like in October 2020 when we took over. There was still quite a bit of infrastructure, and then you can see the picture from March 2021. All of those walls and infrastructure have been decontaminated and deconstructed and taken off site. The remainder of segment 3, decontamination and deconstruction, is anticipated to be completed in the fall of 2021, this year. Next slide, please. So far, since we began work essentially at the end of October, beginning of November 2020, the VERT has spent $7.2 million. The lion's share of that has been on segment 2 and segment 3, with site operations and maintenance taking up the next biggest slice of that. Site operations and maintenance includes the daily dust control measures that we take outside the full enclosure units. So we water down the site, the entire site, several times a day. We collect that wash water. We collect stormwater when it rains, and we make sure that that's treated before that is disposed of. Also, big items are waste disposal. So that waste is the steady stream of decontaminated materials from within segment 2 and segment 3 that have been cleaned, have been cut into manageable pieces, and then are disposed of appropriately. Some work to, as we take down the buildings, we have to keep moving the electrical grid, and so that we continue to have power, so that we can keep the full enclosure units underneath a steady negative pressure. So the full enclosure units, in addition to providing a physical barrier, that is enhanced by having a negative pressure that essentially creates a vacuum within the buildings that traps dust and doesn't let it escape beyond the walls of the enclosure. One thing that we're trying very hard is that I'm trying to put as many of our very limited dollars to use doing cleanup. And so we're keeping administrative and oversight costs functions to less than 5% of the total. And we're doing it by having a very qualified but very lean team. There's not very many of us in the administrative and oversight functions at the site. And again, it's a commitment from the VERT to use the money that we got for permanent remediation improvements of the facility. The next slide, please. And then here is the total budget. We received about $29 million. Obviously that is not enough to do a complete closure of the site, but it is, we think, enough to put the site into safe condition and then be able to monitor and maintain the site for a couple of years as questions about future funding are answered. Again, the lion's share of this budget is for cleanups and then continue running the site and doing the protective things on the site that we need to do. And then, as Amanda pointed out, a considerable chunk of this is to grant us 2 years of operation and maintenance so that we can figure out how the rest of the closure can be funded and implemented. Next slide, please. And the last 2 slides I'll show, as Amanda pointed out, we do daily monitoring of the site at 5 different ambient air monitoring stations. We look for both lead and arsenic, which are the primary constituents of concern at this site. And this data is shared with the AQMD and with our other regulatory partners, EPA and the Dtsc. And as Amanda pointed out, we have not had one single exceedance. On this graph, you see the permit limit for lead, which is 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter, measured on a 30-day rolling average. And then below that, you can see the individual averages for each of the 5 monitoring stations. You can see that they're well below the standard. Next slide, please. And then similarly, you see the daily ambient air monitoring results for arsenic. The standard there is 10 nanograms per cubic meter. And again, you see the 5 lines representing the results, the daily results from the 5 monitoring stations, again, being well below the standard and not showing a single exceedance. And I share Amanda's commitment to maintaining this protective measure for the community and for our on-site workers. It's something that we constantly monitor and make sure that we're doing everything possible so that we do not have an exceedance. Okay, that is my presentation. I would like to introduce Mr. Jason Aspel of the South Coast Air Quality Management District, who will be the next presenter.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Aspel, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for Engineering and Permitting at South Coast AQMD. I'm also joined here tonight by our Deputy Executive Officer for Compliance and Enforcement Division, Terrence Mann. I'll be providing a brief update regarding South Coast AQMD's efforts at the Exide Technologies site since the bankruptcy and control of the site was transferred to the trust. Next slide, please. I will be touching quickly on updates on permitting, monitoring, and our compliance activities, as well as addressing some of the enclosure requirements that were mentioned previously. For permitting, we're continuing to evaluate the change of ownership applications for the Title V permit for VERT. Although this is an administrative process, this particular permit has an additional angle since staff removes equipment from the permit as the site is deconstructed. So as a bag house is removed from service, just as an example, then that would be removed as a permit unit from the facility permit. Under these permit applications, VERT is now subject to all of the same requirements that Exide was subject to, and the applicable sections of our Rule 1420.1 for our secondary lead smelters. And all of the same monitoring, housekeeping, control, and enclosure requirements continue to apply. South Coast AQMD does appreciate that VERT is now tasked with cleaning up Exide's legacy lead, but this is the same lead and the same arsenic that will pose the same health risks to the community if it's not controlled properly. And South Coast AQMD takes our responsibility to protect the public health very seriously, and is imposing all of the same requirements that Exide was subject to. Also, in addition, this facility has been identified as one of the community concerns in our AB 617 process for this particular community, which I know many of you present tonight participate in. So EPA and VERT presentations touched on some of the cost and requirements for enclosures required by our Title V, by the Title V permit for maintenance, decontamination, deconstruction. These are the same pre-existing requirements for work in enclosures that are consistent with our requirements for Exide and Quemeco, and even the smaller lead processing facilities under our jurisdiction. And these requirements are designed to be health protective. Based on our experience, extensive experience with fugitive emissions from lead facilities and ambient monitoring, these activities can result in ambient air concentrations that exceed our rule limits. But these measures have shown to be effective in controlling those emissions. There's not to say that none of these requirements are, not being implemented. It's just an explanation of why these requirements are in place for the protection of public health. Next slide, please. Just to quickly show an example of the type of enclosures we're discussing. Next couple slides show some photos of recent work on a building on the north side of the facility where a smaller temporary enclosure is built and is vented to portable air pollution control equipment. These enclosures don't necessarily have to be the large hacky enclosures that are being used on the much larger buildings for the smelter and material storage processes. Next slide, please. And here's just a look inside that enclosure of the work that is creating the fugitive dust, that our requirements address. This particular work was about 80 feet from the North Monitor, and ambient lead and arsenic levels stayed in compliance during this work. South Coast AQMD doesn't approve the overall design of these enclosures. We only require that there's inward airflow that is vented to control, or in a on a case-by-case basis, if it turns out it's physically infeasible to build a total enclosure, then at least a partial enclosure is required. Next slide, please. So this slide represents various ambient air monitors at the site that essentially cast a net in detecting fugitive emissions at the facility. VERT is responsible for the same 5 monitors as Exide, which are operated by AQMD approved independent contractor. The previous presentations already presented the ambient air monitoring results. So rather than duplicate that presentation, I can just verify that the results have remained in compliance with the limits, as depicted in the graphs in those slides. Also, South Coast AQMD does have 3 monitors in place that have typically been used to verify Exide's ambient air monitoring results in the past. So on the compliance side, inspectors have visited 10 times since our last update to this group to conduct inspections and to investigate routine notifications of unique circumstances, such as cleaning of oversized vehicles outside of the truck wash because they can't fit, or equipment breakdown reports, such as a malfunction of equipment. inspectors investigate these reports and ensure that the operations remain in compliance with the permit and rule requirements. There's still some ongoing investigations with some of these items since they occurred relatively recently, but at this time there's been no enforcement action or notices issued since VERT has assumed control of the site. Next slide, please. I do want to provide some information about how the public can stay up to date regarding AQMD's efforts. We do have an Exide update page that can be accessed through this website or using our search function. Also, we do have a facility information detail where you can find out very detailed information about enforcement action. But the ID for the site is now under VERT. So as I said previously, there's been no enforcement action to date for VERT, but you can look up any activity under this ID at that app. Next slide, please. For additional information, if there's any questions regarding permitting compliance or monitoring, these are our contacts that you can address those questions to. As I said, we're working on the change of ownership. When that is finalized, that will be posted on our website at the internet address that I provided on the previous slide. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jason. That concludes the presentations for this evening. And I'm going to just note that we are running about 30 minutes behind the planned agenda. I'm going to ask the co-chairs, as facilitator is proposed plan is that we move to closing comments at 7:55. To accommodate some of the extended time here. Mark, Meredith, let me know if that works as a plan so that we can make sure to move through the advisory group questions and public comment in that time period. I see a thumbs up from Mark.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine with me.
Okay, so we'll plan to move to closing comments at 7:55. Thank you all for your patience this evening. For advisory group members, if you'd like to speak, please raise your Zoom hand. And I will call on Dr. Jim Wells first.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks to everybody for those presentations. Regarding the on-site cleanup, I was looking over our files, and it was about 6 years ago that we, meaning the advisory group, raised the alarm that RCRA corrective action was getting kicked down the road and was likely to be left unfunded. Because everything we're talking about here really falls under the category of RCRA closure. And that is only about closing the built facilities and not the gross contamination in soil and probably groundwater. So I guess my main question is, what about corrective action? And the second part of my question is, even the closure plan, as approved by Dtsc, called for cleanup of the upper 5 feet of any soil that might be contaminated under waste units. And that seems to have gone away too. So am I mistaken about that? Is VERT responsible for cleaning up the upper 5 feet of soil? And if not, is it permissible for Dtsc to simply waive that requirement? Or what happened? What happened to that requirement? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wells. Please go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you for bringing up the attention to detail. There is a difference, as you've noted, between RCRA closure and the corrective action. I'd like to point out that some of the ancillary buildings that we talked about, those are covered for the majority of how they're being covered under the corrective action. they're actually identified in the interim measure order under the corrective action, with the exception of roof cleaning. That is what's currently written in the closure plan. So not even necessarily the whole facility is under the closure plan. As for what VERT is funded, you are accurate. It does not have enough money to do the 5 feet of soil removal. As I mentioned in my presentation, we don't even have the money to address all the buildings that are the ancillary buildings and take the buildings down, or even all the RECRA permitted units to take them down to ground. So I would like to possibly pass it over to Dtsc to talk about what's next with respect to how to address the deficiency of what will be left in the remaining closure plan.
Please go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, Dr. Wells, you're absolutely right. We have not, as DTSC, we haven't put the RCRA closure or the corrective action. We're not going to dismiss it. It is still on our agenda. We are looking at all of the different ways that we can address the soil contamination and also the groundwater contamination on the site. We do have groundwater contamination from the facility. So we are going through the process of what is the best way to address those right now and address the soil contamination. Right now, we are looking at, though, how long that would take, how much is available. We are looking at the data. So we are not putting the RCRA corrective action away. It is also a matter of looking for the funding to continue with that. We are out right now. We have gone out and addressed potential RPs. We've notified potential RPs, and we're looking forward to working with any future RPs on addressing future contamination on site.
Yeah, and I'll just, thanks, Pete. I'll just follow up on that. So Pete's right. We've sued the first group of RPs. We're engaged in litigation. That litigation includes both injunctive relief. So, sorry, that litigation includes both the demand for work, so cleanup work, as well as the recovery of costs that have already gone to doing cleanup work. Pete's also right that we have, essentially we're balancing two different things. One is we're using all available resources to prioritize the actions at the facility that are needed to protect people. Like, that's our first priority. We know that we don't have sufficient funds right now with the trust. Our main priority is to prioritize that work to protect people. Kind of a secondary one would be to obviously reduce long-term costs so that we can maintain those protections across time. So that goes to operation and maintenance and other things that have been mentioned this evening. Secondly, as Pete mentioned, we're continuing to conduct investigation to review data on the corrective action issues that you referenced. We are looking very seriously at what our options are going forward, both in industrial areas that immediately surround the facility, and then on site too. That all does take resources, Pete's right. So we're trying to take a kind of all hands on deck approach, suing the RPs, at least the first batch of RPs, for both cost recovery and injunctive relief or actions, cleanup actions, while also continuing where Exide left off when it was bankrupt, to review the data and use that in investigations.
Thank you. I'd like to invite the next advisory group member who has their hand up, Jennifer Ganata.
Hi, so I had, this is Jennifer Ganata of Communities for a Better Environment. I had questions in regards to the sale and potential buyers. I know that there isn't per se a public forum in which to vet those, but I'm wondering, is there a way to actually include community input in as one of the criteria in looking in a potential buyer? And I think also just for the next steps for cleanup, what that looks like. And I think just like allowing the community to just have more information as to what the next buyer is because of all the pollution that's happened from the site in previous years.
Thank you for your question. I'll first invite Roberto Puga to weigh in and then see if the agencies would also like to weigh in on your question as well regarding a potential buyer. Roberto?
Right. Thank you, Anna. Well, at this point, as Amanda pointed out during her presentation, we're just trying to identify if there is a potential partner that would be willing to take on all the complexities of the site. One of the things that we would ask them initially is, well, what is your vision for the site? Now, specifically to your question, Jennifer, the trust doesn't have a mechanism for a public forum for that. This process we're going through here is the only one that I'm aware of and that I'm a participant in. But the trust itself doesn't have its own public participation program. However, the beneficiaries of the trust, do, and I would welcome any sort of input, but I'm leaving it to my regulatory partners to kind of be the forefront of public interaction. And I will be in support of them and be available to answer questions and take in input.
Thank you, Roberto. Amanda with US EPA, if you would like to weigh in on that, please.
Sure. So as I did mention, during the public participation process that would be envisioned is the prospective purchaser agreement, which Mr. Cope had mentioned. And as Grant said, that that's not always going to be given to anyone that would be coming in. So we aren't sure if that is something that would be offered to any of the potential parties that are looking at purchasing. I do know that the next steps are the two parties that are interested are going to go through and they're going to ensure that they are still interested given the regulatory challenges, we'll say, of the site with respect to implementation of the closure plan, corrective action, groundwater, things such to that nature. And from that next step, we would determine basically which of the buyers would start the process of engaging Dtsc to determine whether there could be terms that would be agreeable. Pete or Grant, do you want to speak about what that would look like?
Yeah, I'll just jump in really quickly. In terms of the PPA, the prospective purchaser agreement, that really focuses in on, as Amanda said, how much work can get done on the site by the potential buyers. So we'll have to take a look at exactly what they bring forward. We will be heavily weighing the benefits to the community in that entire process. On that same note, you'd asked about public participation, public input. We anticipate absolutely there will be a public participation and input process into our consideration of potential prospective purchasers. We recognize the importance of not just your guys' wisdom, but it's also a site that is right smack dab in the middle of your communities. Therefore, we would want to include that input before making a decision.
Thank you. Next in the queue for the advisory group members, Jane Williams, followed by Mark Lopez. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. Well, I'm very confused by all this, I have to say, because we have hundreds of millions of dollars of costs, and I don't understand why the state is not requesting more money from the legislature. So we looked at what it would cost to actually clean up the site, not just super fence it and super cap it, but actually clean it up and clean up all of the lead that's in the rail yard and in the commercial areas, and expand the investigation past the 1.7 miles and actually clean up the homes that are within the 1.7 miles. And that's many hundreds of millions of dollars. So why is DTSC only requesting 30 million from the legislature?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I can say that the 34 million is very specific, and we had committed to do the 3,200 residences around the facility. So that is, that's one piece of the puzzle. We do not by any means think it's the full picture of what needs to be addressed. The administration will continue to look at all the options, whether that's tapping into LABRIC funds, whether that's additional appropriations. We recognize that there's more to be done. Super capping is not adequate. There needs to be a long-term solution. We need to continue on with the cleanup. And so what the best route is to secure funding for that it's not nailed down, but it is an active conversation.
Well, the last time we had a meeting, you guys said you were refusing to request federal help. So you can only imagine from the community's perspective, they are living in lead, and you are refusing to request federal help, and you are refusing to request help from the legislature when we have a $10 billion surplus. So Meredith,
I did not say, I will say, I did not say we were refusing to ask for help. I said we're considering a lot of different options.
Well, when would that be? Because last meeting we had was in December, I believe.
Yeah, and I will say the budget cycle goes through June 12th, and so I'm not sure how things will evolve between now and then. But we do have our eyes on that date in terms of what are the possibilities in the next year's budget.
Well, you just requested a budget change proposal 2 weeks ago for $300 million to clean up other communities. Well, why did you request $300 million to clean up this community? I'm very confused. I don't understand it. What's your strategy, and when are we going to know what that is? Because right now it looks like you don't have one.
Well, I'm sorry that you view it that way, and I wish I could share more. The budget process is very dynamic. It's also confidential. And so there's not much more that I can share right now.
Well, but I mean, you just requested $300 million 2 weeks ago.
Yes, we did.
To clean up other communities. Why didn't you request money to clean up Exide?
I don't think it's as simple as an either or, why this and why not that.
Will you request emergency funding from US EPA to help with the rail yards in the commercial areas?
We're pursuing a lot of different options. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, you can keep asking the questions, but I don't really have a good way to answer them right now.
Thank you.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Next in the queue, Mark, please.
Yeah. So I'm going back to the site. What I'm understanding from this is there isn't enough money to clean up the site. By any means. There's the potential that funds will come from other responsible parties, maybe. So the future of the site regarding cleanup, very uncertain. So if that's happening, why are there brokers and potential buyers and developers being engaged? I don't understand that. The only thing that makes sense is that the financial responsibility will be put on a future developer, right? And what that starts to remind me of is when DTSC, and again, a lot of you who are now part of DTSC were not part of DTSC at that point, but DTSC's rationale for potentially permitting Exide to continue to operate was we need to keep Exide open so that they can pay to clean up the community. If Exide closes, they're not going to pay for cleanup. That was the rationale at that point. It was disgusting. It was offensive. Glad that didn't happen, right? But I'm fearing we're going to end up in a similar position where we're going to get an Amazon, right? We're going to get some other toxic facility that would want to be in this place. And at some point, they might be the only buyer, or they might be the buyer that's offering the most money. And the rationale might be like, well, if you want it really cleaned up, then we got to go with this buyer because they got the money. And I just am not, I don't want to be put in that position. I don't want our communities to be put in a position where we're stuck between everything's got to stay contaminated, or you got to like deal with future contamination from another facility. Because at the end of the day, I know I wouldn't trust that company to actually do adequate cleanup. And, you know, I'm concerned about the future of the direction of the trust. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. And I just want to know, I see Dr. Wells, you have your hand up as well for follow-up. And I want to make sure that we leave at least 10 minutes for public comments. So I'll call you, Dr. Wells, after any of our panelists might respond to Mark's comment around the conversation with buyers. Is there anyone from EPA or the trust? We'll do that same sequence before. If you want to start off, Amanda, this time, and if Roberto and Pete would like to add anything.
So, Mark, I just hear the concern that you have regarding the future purchaser and future operations that could occur at the site. I'm not sure if you were in the January meeting, but any new facility or any new operation that would occur at the site or at the facility would be subject to brand new permitting scheme. Although the RECRA permit kind of, we'll say the liability shifts, the operations itself, especially since the building has been taken down, the operations aren't going to continue moving forward. So any new company that will come in will have the same permitting obligations as they would of any new startup. So the fact that this is at a previously contaminated site isn't going to be any type of, I guess, like get out of jail free card for them to continue to contaminate. And as for what a prospective purchaser, why they would be purchasing, that's something that they're doing their cost benefit analysis on what they think they can use the site for. From our evaluation, it's not necessarily the highest money in terms of what could, trading one evil, I think I kind of heard, is the concept. It's more so that we are looking at a potential purchaser that would be able to respect any environmental restrictions that are in sight, that are knowledgeable about any cleanups that would need to be undertaken at the site, and they are willing to commit to those. And getting that in hand is what we view as the most important aspect. Roberto, do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, Amanda, thank you. I think you did a very good job of explaining kind of the complexities here. If this was a perfect world, Mark, the VERT would have gotten enough money to do the closure properly. And, we wouldn't have to grapple with the future ownership question right now. Typically you don't, because, you want to concentrate on the closure and do it properly. Unfortunately, the VERT, because of the funding that the VERT got, is kind of put in a position trying to see where else I can get additional funds, where the VERT can get additional funds to continue doing, making the site safe by continuing the closure. And so that's why, Amanda and I are exploring what's possible. And that's really the impetus, is that we don't have a lot of money. We don't have enough money to complete the closure, but the VERT agreement places the burden on us to try to get the closure completed in a very real sense. So I am casting around, trying to find other ways to raise funds so I can continue the closure.
And just to also make sure I follow in that it is also up to DTSC to have involvement, and this will not be a unilateral decision by any means. DTSC just hasn't been involved on the call yet, just as a result of scheduling. They will be involved. The next step is discussing with DTSC what closure obligations will remain, and if DTSC is interested in offering that PPA and what that looks like. So,
yeah.
And I'd like to just point out also, the VERT can't sell the property unilaterally. I do not have that power. Any sale of property has to be approved by EPA and consultation with the DTSC. So I can't, put a deal together and execute it. That's just not within the powers that were granted to the VERT. It has to be an approved decision by our regulatory partners.
Thank you both.
Yeah, I think just to put a cap on it, I think it goes back to the point that Jen made earlier and that a bunch of folks made in the hearing that was held earlier this year, that there isn't a lot of trust. There isn't a good track record here, right? You made the comment about get out of jail free card. Exide literally got a get out of jail free card. And so I think that's what we're looking for. Where are the places that our communities can ensure that we're not fighting whatever comes next?
Thank you. And I'm going to actually move to Dr. Wells' question to close out our advisory group discussion before moving to public comment. Please, Dr. Wells.
And I'll be quick. Mark, the answer to your question is that the liabilities, the cleanup cost on this site far exceed the value. So nobody is going to buy this property unless they get concessions and they're not forced to clean up. So it's a little bit of a whitewash for folks to imply that a new buyer will take on all the obligations to clean up the site. So these are really profound and valid concerns. And another, let's face it, another entity that has a get out of jail free card is VERT. They don't seem to have any liabilities at all, and they get to spend $29 million. But it's a real issue that DTSC and EPA are going to have to cut a really sweet deal with a prospective buyer in order to get anyone interested in buying this place, because the liabilities are in excess of the value.
Thank you, Dr. Wells. Barbara, if you could please move to the next slide. We're going to now go back to public comments and questions. And I'd first like to ask if on the Spanish language interpretation line, we have any questions. And I'm going to pause for about 10 seconds to allow the interpreter to invite questions from that line. And then I'll go to the English language audio. Okay, from our participants, next in having Zoom hand raised is Pete. If you could please unmute your line and share your comment or question. Welcome. Hello, Pete. We cannot hear you if you're speaking. Okay, we will come back.
I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah, welcome.
Hello. This is Pete Reyes, community member and WorkSource participant. I just wanted to address two things. And I know I addressed some of this with Meredith and Grant, which I appreciate, but just wanted to clarify in the bigger scale. One, I feel like there's a big disconnect because there was a question asked earlier about COVID protocol. And just to inform that while I was there for 6 months with AIS and Part 1, not once was my temperature checked. None of my coworkers were checked or any of the crews checked. I don't believe that the protocol that is being informed or saying that is being followed, it is being done. So that's one of them, because I feel like there's a big disconnect, and I don't think I've seen Dtsc show up and ask for that, but I can ensure that none of the crews have any of the temperature checks on site. That's one of them. And this is something I also did bring up to the labor union as well. And two, I wanted to say that I feel like there's a big disconnect as well with the contractor. I was laid off on February 5th, informed that by the owner of Power One, that by Jason Klein, that there was a DTSC directive, and this has been clarified that it wasn't a DTSC directive, but they're informing that it's because they overstaffed, anticipating that there would be more crews. However, it's a bit confusing because I was informed by the new contractor, which is SFNS, that they would be hiring me. It started with 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We're going about a month already. And Monday, we're supposed to be starting. But I feel like there's a big confusion because I don't understand if there's not enough housing, which is something that was also informed by the contractor, that there was not enough houses. How is another contractor coming in to finish the project or to grow more crews? So I don't know if there could be more clarification on that as well. And lastly, I just wanted to say that although this is a business and contractors, at the end of the day, there's a business end to it. The way I was laid off and the rest of the participants were laid off was very patronizing. The demeanor was very rude. And I believe that I think it's very important that when a contractor wins this project, it's very important for them to be aware that this community has been vulnerable, and to come in a patronizing and demeanor way, I think it's unacceptable. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Hortensia, I saw you turn on your camera. Would you like to respond to part of Pete's comments they shared with us today?
Well, I could answer part of the comments and address them and follow up on it. And then if Mehdi can step in as well, because I think he could offer some more insights on the field conditions. So I would have to check in with the contractor to find out why IAS, if there are some crews that are not following the protocol and what the conditions are. Because I understand that at one point there was 20 crews and we were planning on ramping up to 25 crews. But yes, there is some truth to the fact that there was not sufficient properties for us to clean up. And the contractor did have to make the difficult decision of sending some crews home because they could not afford to have so many people at the properties waiting for properties to get cleaned up. And I know that it was a difficult decision for them. We've talked about it during our weekly meetings and updates. Part of that is those 600 property owners who have been unresponsive. We are doing everything collaboratively with the contractors. There is a contractor that is also helping us assist our PPU staff, reaching out to gain more access. So, for example, we sent out some letters back in November of last year, and we got about 50 responses to that. We've sent a second letter, and we are steadily getting about 10 access agreements per week just from the letters alone. And then the contractors are reaching out themselves to the different properties. We have a list, and we are all making efforts to reach out to them. I do understand that at least the last update is that we will start ramping back up, getting the crews. We have every intention of having at least 20 to 25 crews so that we can meet the minimum of 20 properties per week being cleaned up so that we can meet our target goal by December 2021. But, you know, as any other project, we run into snags that we can't predict, and we have to make a difficult decision, or at least the contractor is, to scale back because they cannot afford to pay out and not clean up properties. And Mehdi, if there's something else you would like to add.
Thank you, Hortensia. I think you covered most of it. I think the only thing I can add to that is that, yes, we are increasing the number of crews. I am pleased, Pete, that you're going to be starting on Monday. That was a focus of our discussion with NEC, and I'm pleased that that's ongoing. That's the only thing I wanted to add.
I'll jump in really quickly. Pete, this is Grant. So you raised the issue of whether your temperature was taken. I don't know the full extent of the COVID protocols for NEC, but we'll certainly look into whether that is a requirement under the protocols. The protocols are approved by our industrial health and safety officials. So we'll take a look at the protocols and see if that's a requirement there. And then, we have your statement that it's not occurring. So assuming that, let's presume that it's in there, we'll take steps to make certain that the contractor is adhering to all the protocols in the future. If it's not, we'll definitely make certain that the protocols are shared again with workers on the program so that everybody's clear and nobody's feeling like they're being put into a situation that they're not comfortable about their safety. They should know that these protocols are reviewed by industrial health and safety professionals, and that the measures in those protocols are there to keep them safe, as safe as you can be while you're working out in the community during a pandemic.
Thank you. Do you want to add something, Amanda?
I did, yeah. One thing I think I heard Pete when he was mentioning the temperature taking, that was in response to segment 1, which I think was something I wanted Roberto possibly to talk about the timing of segment 1. Segment 1, I think that's what was referenced, which is on-site work. And Roberto can talk about the on-site work and the COVID protocols that are being followed under the trust and the timing from segment 1.
Segment 1 was actually done by Exide while they were still in operation. So when we took over in October, segment 1 was completed, and the FEU was put over segment 2. So we took over kind of mid through segment 2. I can tell you that I know for a fact, because I was actually had my temperature taken yesterday when I was at the site. We have installed a no-touch temperature a station at the door where you need to put your forehead up, and it takes your temperature automatically, and then it's logged in by the security guard. So I know for a fact that it is being done every day for every person that enters the site. Ever since we took over the property in late October.
Just to jump in real quick, I think he's referring to the residential cleanup, not the Exide site.
Yeah, that's what I was going to, exactly, Mark. That's what I was going to, there's just two different contexts in which the workers are working.
Sorry, I heard AIS in segment 1. So I thought AIS segment 1 was the facility. So wanted to make sure we got it clear that we're doing the trust.
Yeah, we'll follow up, Pete, and then we'll get back in touch with you.
Thank you. And we are getting close to the end of the meeting. I'm going to actually invite, there's one more person who hasn't had a chance to speak, who has had their hand raised. I'm going to ask that our last public comment for the evening be TS. If you could please unmute your line, and then we'll move to our brief announcements and closing comments by the chairs. Welcome, TS.
Well, thanks. So first of all, for transparency purposes of this meeting, this Zoom is supposed to be an opportunity to engage, right? So for me, I want to see what other community members' concerns were. And so you set the Q&A and the chat settings to not display the questions. So essentially, you censored this whole meeting. So I feel like this could have been like a nice email, okay? Second of all, DTSC failed tonight on that. Fix it for the next meeting. Okay, cool. Next, Meredith, I know you think that saying that this community has done a good job of advocating for itself. I know you think that's a compliment, but it's really not. Okay. Like, that's just a painful reminder that DTSC ignored our for a really long time. So if you could please stop saying that, that would be great. Next, the parkways need cleanup. I don't know what city you think we live in where wind or rain only happens on properties and not on these little parkways, but yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And how you think that Exide lead is only on properties, but in the parkways, it's not Exide lead. That's car lead. Lead is lead. It should be cleaned up. And four, thank you, Jane, for saying what you said. Meredith, go back to the legislature and tell them that the community, we demand more money for a full and safe cleanup. And then fifth, the community should then, after a complete cleanup, be able to decide what is built or how the site is used for the future. We're paying for it with our taxes. So it only makes sense that we get that.
Thank you, TS, very much for your comments. You laid out a number, and especially in the Q&A, about being able to view it in the future. And so we're definitely taking that back to make a better meeting experience for people in future meetings. I'm going to actually, we're going to move to closing comments by the co-chairs very soon. I'm going to ask that Barbara, you please advance the slides to show that there is a Parkways public comment period open right now. There's a direct link to the survey, which is still open, and also a direct link there on how to join that Zoom meeting next week. It's an evening meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. I'll ask to move to the next slide. And I apologize for being short on time, Janet, but if you'd like to share anything about the lead hazard program, and then we'll move to closing comments.
Hi, actually, Anna, because we are short on time, or we've gone way over time, the information is here on the slides. For more information, there's a phone number to call and an email. You know, I'm happy to offer up my information if folks would like to talk offline about the program. But our lead paint remediation program, you know, which was on hold for a year, we're getting back into the field. So apologies that I'm not, you know, providing more details and not giving more of an explanation for those of you who aren't familiar with the program. But Public Health is going to be offering free lead paint remediation for homes in the Exide area and beyond. And we can talk more about that at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll ask Mark and Meredith if you'd like to share closing comments. Mark, if you'd like to go first, or hand it to Meredith since you went first last time, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, it's fine. I can go first. Just thank you to everyone again for participating. We are way over time, and that just shows, you know, the importance of all of this, right? And nothing about any of this process has been easy. And it continues to be difficult and tough. And so I'm still encouraged by people's willingness to continue to engage, to continue to push, and definitely, you know, want to lift up that, you know, the best way for agency staff and folks in the trust as well, who are not agency staff, is I would just encourage y'all. From what I've seen, some of the best practices have been when folks don't get defensive, right? Like, engage. It's tough. However we come to the table, like, engage with us and continue to engage with us. Because if not, you know, the energy can turn towards defensiveness and towards combativeness, and in some ways instigate some of what is honestly like years, in some cases, multiple generations of frustration with this process, right? And so, looking forward to the work that will happen between now and the next meeting, and hope all of y'all will join us for the next meeting.
Thank you. Meredith?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody, for the comments. Mark, that's a good note to end on. We received a lot of information to carry back and to discuss, not only within the department and within Cal EPA, but across the administration and with the legislature. It is an ongoing active conversation, and we need to make sure that we are taking what we hear and remembering it as we have those conversations. And so that's why you're right. It's very important to make sure that we're fostering and making sure that we're able to hear and receive the information that's provided through these avenues. They're flawed. Doing this virtually is flawed, but it's what we have right now, and we want to get the most we can out of it. So thank you all. I know, again, another long evening and so many people stuck with it, so I'm really appreciative.
Thank you very much, everyone. Follow-up information for the meeting will be on the DTSC website, linked here. Please have a safe evening, and we will be back in touch soon. Thank you.